on Network Africa. Uganda confirms fresh outbreak of Ebola virus. At least 23 people killed in road crash during Zambia church trip. Plus, United Nations investigators accuses Ethiopia of Tigray atrocities. Hello and welcome to the program today. I'm Teniola Oyetayo. We begin in East Africa, where a 24-year-old man infected with Ebola has died in central Uganda in a fresh outbreak confirmed by health officials. The health minister told journalists that the victim had exhibited symptoms before succumbing to the disease. He was a resident of Ngambano village in Mubende district, about 147 kilometers from the capital, Kampala. According to a statement by the World Health Organization, the case of the relatively rare Sudan strain was confirmed by the Uganda Virus Research Institute. It says 8 people with suspected symptoms are receiving medical care and that it's sending staff to the affected area. The East African country last reported an outbreak of the strain in 2012.
On the 15th of September 2022, one suspected case of viral hemorrhagic fever was identified and isolated in Mubende Regional Referral Hospital. The patient was a 24-year-old male who lived in Ngabano village of Madudu sub-county in Mubende district. Patient who had been confirmed with Ebola passed on, and the current situation is that the body is isolated in the mortuary, waiting to be buried by the medical team. We are right now gathering more information on the possible source of infection of the confirmed cases.
And joining us now for further discussion on this is public health physician Kiala Ishaku. He joins us virtually from Abuja. Thank you so much for your time on the program, sir.
Thank you for having me.
So let's get to it then. Uganda last reported the outbreak of Ebola in 2012. Now, 10 years after, it has confirmed a fresh outbreak of the virus. Why are we seeing a reoccurrence at this time?
Yeah, the last outbreak of Ebola was in 2012, and the strain of the virus was linked to that in Sudan. And so it shows that there is a history of a trans-border resurgence of Ebola in Uganda. So that can be traced back to Sudan. I just want to say that increase in international travels, increase in animal movement, trans-border animal movement from one country to another can mimic the transmission of Ebola, and also movement of humans from one point to another. So I presumed that the index case that is already dead may have had an encounter with someone that traveled to Sudan. And so there is need for an active case search.
So how should this, how does it change life for Ugandans? I mean, when we had the outbreak in 2014 here in Nigeria, isolation and contact tracing were key efforts to curb the further spread. Do you see health officials doing this now with just one case confirmed so far in Uganda?
Absolutely. I was following the trend through the West African WHO and also with the WHO. There are about 8 cases that have contacts that have been traced to the death index case. The Uganda quarantine center has been activated. Their emergency response center too has been activated. So there are a whole lot of surveillance activities that is going on, quite active surveillance activity. I think the way Uganda was able to balance the response in 2012, they will also bring it to bear by experience. But it also called on the citizens of Uganda, not only Uganda, African continent at large, to be very, very careful and also adhere to the non-pharmaceutical measures, just like the way we applied in the case of COVID-19. So we expect that people should avoid overcrowded places. There should be an intensified washing of hands and sneezing. And if you develop the signs and symptoms of rashes, difficulty in breathing and tiredness, a rise in temperature, you should be able to seek for the medical attention. So I think that if were able to do this, we should be able to handle this. And Uganda has a very strong healthcare system to be able to handle such kind of outbreaks.
All right, then, public health physician Akiala Ishaku, thank you so much for your thoughts on the program.
Thank you for having me.
And moving on now, at least 23 women have been killed and several others injured after a lorry overturned on a road in northern Zambia during a church trip. 17 people died on the spot, while 6 others were pronounced dead on arrival at a local clinic. The Sunday accident in Sama district involved the Women's Christian Fellowship Group from the United Church of Zambia. According to local media, the lorry was carrying 51 passengers. The driver survived but sustained injuries. A police spokesperson said the driver was speeding and failed to negotiate a curve. In the meantime, the president of Zambia, Akande Ichilema, who was away in New York for the UN General Assembly, has condoled with the families of victims. He wrote on his Facebook page, "We are saddened to hear the tragic news of the women who died in a road accident in the early hours of this morning. We send our message of condolences and prayers to the church and the affected families to find comfort in our Lord Jesus Christ. We also wish the injured a quick recovery." And security matters now. The Somalian government says more than 100 al-Shabaab militants have been killed in operations over the last 3 days by the Somali National Army, which is receiving support from U.S. forces in central Hiran region. Hiran and the neighboring Galgudud region have become the epicenter of weeks of clashes between government-backed clan militia and al-Shabaab fighters. State TV on Monday also reported that the army had killed at least 54 militants in Hiran region. A day before, the army said more than 75 militants were killed in joint operations with clan militia. In its latest video message, al-Shabaab spokesperson threatened to retaliate against the government's use of clan militia. An increase of attacks on humans by hippos around Lake Naivasha, a freshwater lake outside the Rift Valley town of Naivasha in Kenya's Nakuru County, is threatening the livelihoods of local fishermen as the government moves to address the problems of human-wildlife conflict. The Kenyan government says it's trying to address human-wildlife conflict, including a compensation fund set up for the families of fishermen attacked by hippos, but warns that human encroachment on traditional wildlife habitats is bound to increase the conflict.
Following heavy rains in October 2019, Lake Naivasha expanded to its largest size in nearly a century, flooding land where hundreds of hippos once grazed. The lake's hippos were forced into the same shallow waters used by local fishermen, bringing them in close contact with the potentially deadly animals. Fishermen who depended on the lake for a living say they risk their lives daily as they try to land their catch, many using crude boats fashioned from oil drums. Eric Njogu says he is grateful, however, that he's managed to narrowly escape a hippo attack.
Kwa katika shughuli zangu za uvuvi I was in my daily fishing schedule when I encountered the hippo, which attacked me. It bit me, and I was lucky to survive because I managed to swim faster. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here talking to you. This is their territory, and as fishermen, we're trying to get our daily bread here. And that's why you see that even after healing, I still had to come back here, because I don't have another option. My children need to eat, so this is my territory.
He is not the only one who has been targeted by wildlife around the lake. Several other fishermen in the area have also been attacked by the hippos, with one fisherman losing part of his right arm in the attack. According to data released by National Geographic, hippos kill an estimated 500 people every year across Africa. The territorial battle between hungry fishermen and angry hippos seems set to continue. And while local authorities have tried to educate the men about the dangers posed by these animals, the need to make a living still sees fishermen taking to the waters of Lake Naivasha despite the peril.
And still in Kenya, 7 more bodies have been retrieved from River Yala in western Kenya, near the spot where a dozen others have been discovered over the past 2 years. The unclaimed bodies were retrieved from the river in the last 2 months, according to a police report. The bodies have not been identified as they await autopsy. Mortuary officials say 3 bodies were retrieved by divers in September, and the other 4 were discovered by residents along the river. The latest discovery increases the tally of bodies retrieved from the river to more than 30 since January. Human rights activists say residents in the area are living in fear over the discovery of unidentified bodies from the river. Police are yet to comment on the matter. However, details of forensic investigations conducted early this year seeking to uncover who was responsible and the motive behind the killings are yet to be made public. United Nations investigators say they believe the Ethiopian government is behind ongoing crimes against humanity in the northern Tigray region. In a report, the Commission of Human Rights Experts on Ethiopia highlighted what it called credible information of large-scale killings committed by Ethiopia's National Defense Force that targeted Tigrayan men and boys of fighting age. The government has, however, not responded to the allegations. Investigators say there is also evidence that starvation is being used as a weapon of war. According to the report, human rights violations have been committed by all sides since fighting erupted nearly 2 years ago. It describes the humanitarian crisis in Tigray as shocking. Tigrayan authorities have welcomed the report. The United Nations Transformation Education Summit for the year 2022 is opened at the United Nations headquarters in New York. Addressing leaders at the segment of the summit, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres spoke about the need to transform the education system. He noted that some 70% of 10-year-olds in poor countries are unable to read a basic text. Also addressing the youth segment of the summit, climate justice activist and UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador Vanessa Nakate reiterated the need for all children to have access to education.
Education transforms lives, economies and societies. But we also know we must transform education because education is in a deep crisis. Instead of being the great enabler, education is fast becoming a great divider. Some 70% of 10-year-olds in poorer countries are unable to read a basic text. Either they are out of school or in school but barely learning. Education systems take little account of lifelong learning, and teachers are undertrained, undervalued, and underpaid. The digital divide penalizes poor students, and the education financing gap yawns wider than ever. A new vision for education in the 21st century is taking shape. Above all, quality education must support the development of individual learners throughout his or her life. And it must help people learn how to learn, with a focus on problem solving and collaboration. It must provide the foundations for learning, from reading, writing, and mathematics to scientific, digital, social, and emotional skills. It must also develop students' capacity to adapt to the rapidly changing world of work.
We'll have more on the UN Education Summit in just a moment. Plus, do you want to be able to read books for free? Well, you might want to join this 82-year-old Egyptian in his makeshift library. We'll tell you all about it in a moment. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Still on the UN Education Summit, the UN Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed has presented the UN Secretary General's vision statement on transforming education, which lays out a path for education in the 21st century and serves as an input to negotiations in preparation of the Summit of the Future, which will be held at the UN General Assembly in 2024, closing the United Nations Transforming Education Summit. She told member states that with the right to education being deprived to so many, education is losing its power as a great enabler.
With the right to education being deprived to so many, education is losing its power as a great enabler. And with trust breaking down, our social fabric fraying, our economies changing and our environment under attack, it is clear that education systems are no longer fit for purpose. And that is why the Secretary General sees the transformation of education as an urgent political imperative for our collective futures. This transformation will not happen overnight, but we must get moving, and we must do so today. Ultimately, the transformation of education will only happen if it is demanded by people. And if there's one takeaway from this summit, it is that young people and young students will be the heartbeat of this effort. A public movement for the transformation of education has begun to emerge. It must be nurtured, it must be supported. Such a movement can be supported by the 5 world leaders who have accepted the Secretary General's request to step up as global champions for education transformation. The Emir of Qatar, the President of Sierra Leone, the President of Argentina, and the Prime Minister of Japan, and the President of the European Commission.
In a bid to tackle the national power crisis in South Africa, the country's spokesman has announced that President Cyril Ramaphosa will miss a United Nations General Assembly this week. This comes after South Africa's state-owned power utility, Eskom, moved to Stage 6 electricity outages on Sunday, September the 18th. It's only the 3rd time it has ever taken the measure, which deprives most South Africans of power for at least 6 hours a day. Eskom has implemented outages for over a decade, choking economic growth in Africa's most industrialized country. Amid growing public anger, President Ramaphosa has pledged new steps to address the crisis in July. However, power cuts have persisted. And UN Special Representative for South Sudan, Nicholas Haysom, has welcomed the August 4th agreement by state parties to the revitalized peace agreement on a roadmap which extends the current transitional period by 24 months. Briefing the Security Council, Mr. Haysom said it's always the political will that can make a difference and not an endpoint in the country's journey on the path to democratic transition.
Let me underscore that the roadmap is a waypoint, not an endpoint, in South Sudan's journey on the path to democratic transition. This is not the time to give up on a sense of urgency to implement the peace agreement. Subnational violence, marked by cycles of cattle raiding, abductions, revenge killings, continues to devastate communities and drive humanitarian needs. Incidents of conflict-related sexual violence are increasing, but it could be effectively addressed if all concerned parties and relevant authorities put a stop to the use of sexual violence as a weapon of choice. Food security continues to deteriorate in South Sudan, with an estimated 8.3 million people in need. These trends are being driven by climate shocks, including floods and droughts, by the conflict itself, the economic downturn, protracted displacement, and disrupted livelihoods. Based on ongoing humanitarian assessment, flooding and heavy rains have impacted hundreds of thousands of people to date. Access to the people in affected locations remains challenging due to impassable roads, flooded airstrips, and insecurity. We know that if properly developed, livestock, agriculture, and wildlife could become engines of livelihood creation for generations to come. These natural endowments can be a source of conflict or a source of cooperation, and it is always political will that makes the difference.
The roadmap, Madam President, gives the parties signatory to the peace agreement in South Sudan another chance to seriously, in the next 2 years, to implement all provisions and chapters of the agreement.
Meanwhile, the UN mission in South Sudan and its humanitarian partners have traveled to Mvolo to assess the impact of flood in the area. The partners are urging local authorities to relocate communities to higher ground. Floods in the region have displaced some 5,000 people. Well, for the team leader of the World Food Programme in Western Equatoria, it's a grim reality for humanitarian partners as they struggle to prioritize aid following reduced donor funding in South Sudan.
The damage is quite visible. We are verifying the assessment reports they have given us. We are verifying really. As you know, resources are very much limited. We want to know the people who are really in need of support, and they have told us their first priority being the NFIs, followed by food, followed by wash and health. So tomorrow we'll have an opportunity to meet the bigger partners in Yambio, led by the RRC, so that we can plan using our supplies, limited supplies in Yambio and some supplies in Juba, to immediately start responding, helping the most affected vulnerable groups.
A former Tunisian Prime Minister Ali Larayedi has been detained by anti-terrorism police over allegations of involvement in smuggling jihadists to Syria. A lawyer said Mr. Larayedi, who is also a senior figure in the Islamist opposition and at a party, had been questioned for hours. In a statement, Ennahda denounced this as a flagrant violation of human rights. The party leader is due to be questioned later today. Ennahda rejects the charges. I will move to Egypt now to meet 82-year-old Hamdallah Abdulhafiz, who is providing books to be read for free, a mission he says has been for most of his life. He has collected about 15,000 books and hopes to make an impact by offering young men and women a library of his village books to expand their knowledge. Take a look.
What appears as a small hole in the wall is where Hamdallah Abdulhafiz has spent his life, amounting a collection of thousands of books, offering them to readers in his village to read or borrow for free. Abdulhafiz and his makeshift library are one of the only outlets available with books and a small reading space for inhabitants of the small village of Dakalia, north of Egypt. Paperbacks and hardbacks of topics from Islamic studies, literary works, and some educational material on the Arabic language can all be found in Abdulhafiz's place.
I started collecting books more than 50 years ago. I continue to stock this library so people in my village can benefit from it, because there is no youth club or no library where those who desire knowledge or love to read can read.
I come here because there is a large collection of books in Sheikh Hamdallah's library, so I come to read and borrow books from him. I also ask him about the books he has, and we recite Quran or talk about the rulings of the Sunnah, jurisprudence and hadiths. and there are miscellaneous books in all fields.
Abdel Hafez's collection reached several thousands of books in a variety of topics. He doesn't only offer the books for people to read or borrow, but he also consults with people on the topics and makes recommendations for them. The old man says he hopes to find support to turn his book-stacked room into an organized library.
Guess you help in every way that you can. And that's the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Teniola Oyetayo.